My name is Gary Pedretti. I've been in 4D since about 1990, version 2. Same company, a regional airline up in Alaska. Names changed several times, but still the same basic things. Been using 4D to run all of our operations ever since then. The title did say Wakanda in there, and that's going to be some part of it, but really what I'm trying to do this year is just kind of show everything that we're doing with 4D, Wakanda, and the web presence because of that is a small portion of that. So was there anybody here that was just like dying to see the latest bleeding edge part of Wakanda? Because that's not where I'm going. Okay, good. I'm going to kind of show you everything else that we're doing and just why 4D does so many things for us in our regional airline, which we consider an enterprise environment because we're so diverse. We're a regional airline based in Alaska, serve a little over 100 communities, totally within the state of Alaska. We have about a little over 1,000 employees. We do about 300 to 400 flights a day. Most of them in small aircraft, and that's what makes it unique for us as an airline. And some of the major airline reservation systems don't scale well down to small aircraft, so we have to do a lot of custom programming on our own. And so 4D has always been part of the solution. I mean, initially it was doing everything in the airline. We did everything from accounting to the reservations to everything. As the airline has grown, we've had to switch some things into the bigger systems, like our passenger reservations are all in Sabre now, but we still need to pull that Sabre data into a local 4D application to actually print out a load manifest for the pilots to say, okay, these people are on your airplane. And here's all the details about them and stuff like that. So 4D has been something that we have to do. The other thing we deal with in Alaska is a very network environment. In Alaska, you kind of have to think of us as a third world country because of the fact that the network structure throughout the state's really slow in many places. Until recently, if you weren't in Fairbanks or Anchorage, everything was satellite-based links, which introduces real high latency. And so trying to run a 4D client server over that has never really been possible. So we've always been looking for ways to speed things up. One of the first things we did way back in the beginning was let me get on down here, and being flexible, okay, that's just the main topic. So diverse data sources. We have to use, we have a lot of data sources. Initially, everything was in 4D. Now, Sabre is one of our big sources for data for our reservations, and so we have to pull in stuff from Sabre. We also get weather from the FAA through a web service that's available. We get web services. We also use web services to do credit card authorizations. Everything we get from Sabre is a web service. So we're pulling web services to get all of the passenger reservations from Sabre, put them in our local database, and then manipulate them. We use ODBC to talk to our accounting platform. Used to be it was a 4D-based accounting program. Now it's Microsoft Dynamics GP, but it's an ODBC compliant database, and so I can make queries out of my system into their system, and that's where the source for all my users are. Because when they hire somebody, they put them in the payroll system. They know if they work for us or not. Nightly, I pull in, or on demand, pull in a list of users from the payroll system and update my user database in 4D. So I'm using ODBC connections. The GPS data, all of our aircraft have GPS systems in them and report live locations back through various vendors. We pull all that data into a single database, which is 4D, and aggregate it, so then our end users can then display that data either on moving maps, which I don't actually do in 4D, but the data source, the data resides in 4D, and I have other ways to access it in 4D. Weather, like I mentioned earlier, we pull in via, actually right now, via a telnet connection that's scripted out in command line telnet to a thing called DUATS, which is Direct User Access Terminal for all the weather that National Weather Service provides. We pull that into 4D, and I'm going to show you examples of all this as I run the actual live program. And of course, I mentioned credit card authorization. We also do a lot of exporting of 4D data. Most of our end users, when they want to do reports, they want to do it in Excel. So rather than trying to write all these different reports in 4D, I've tried different systems, different plugins, different reporting processes, and have used them, but invariably the user says, can you just give it to me in Excel spreadsheet? So I do a lot of exporting into tab downloaded files, give it to the user, email it to them, or just throw it in their My Documents folder and say, here it is, open it in Excel, do whatever you want to do with it. So the diverse network has always been a problem in Alaska. When we first started trying to make our application work out in the areas where we had high latency networks, we tried lots of different solutions. We tried a web solution, which worked because it's stateless. It'll work over a slow network connection, but then you have two different user interfaces, one for the people that are operating out on the web and one people that are working on a desktop. So we then tried to make it one UI, and when the thing called 4D Open came out, does anybody remember about 4D Open? It was a way to abstract your data connection back to the server, but it was synchronous, which made it, nothing happened until you got the data, so it was kind of slow. So we tried that. When web services came out, I switched to using web services. So I had a standalone application that would talk to this, whenever it needed data, it would talk to the server and use web services. And I was actually querying records, taking the records, stuffing them into a blob, sending the blob across a web service, unpacking the blob on the local machine and back into a record, displaying the record. And that works faster than it sounds. When SQL Passthru came through, starting in version 11, we thought that sounded really good. And so we started using that. And that's what I'm using today. Okay, and in many ways, it's very similar to what the Orta thing that they showed yesterday is going to work, in that he showed an example in there where he had a remote data source back at his server at home. Well, I'm doing that now with SQL Passthru. The code that everybody runs when it gets ready to actually access the data, I'm using select into arrays for all my queries. I'm displaying all my data in list boxes and variables. I don't use any modify selections or display selections. So when I get ready to do the actual select to go get all the records and put them in arrays, I just first check and see, am I talking to my local data source, or do I need to do an SQL login and connect to my server back in Fairbanks, which is where the server is. So I check that every time before I do the actual SQL immediate, I connect to the server back in Fairbanks, and I'll show you that in a minute. Isolating the server, of course, from a security standpoint, we keep the actual 4D server inside on a private network. The only thing we have sitting in the DMZ is two different things. One is a client workstation that's connected to the server that's running a web server that's providing web services to some other vendors we have who need to authenticate users against our user database, so we offer a web service. And so that web service sits out in the DMZ. And then the Wakanda servers, which we're running, are in the DMZ. And then, of course, they're talking to the database through the 4D mobile connection. So we keep the server isolated that way. We also use a standalone client machine to do routine tasks at night, housekeeping calls. It does a lot of queries to Sabre, because there's a lot of reports we'd like to get out of Sabre that you do in Sabre. And Sabre still has command line. I don't know if people remember the old days when you go to a travel agency and they'd sit there and type all these command lines. That still exists, and there's a lot of reports that you still have to get them that way. Unfortunately, you get little screenshots at a time. So you have to do if you want to do 10 days worth of history or looking into the future in your reservations, you have to do 10 command lines, one for each day, and then sometimes even multiples of those depending on what destination you look at. So I've scripted a lot of those, so these machines at night will sit there and do 900 Sabre queries, capture them all into text files, and turn around, put them in an email, and send them out to the users. In the morning, they've got these text files that say, here's our future reservations from a statistical standpoint, so they can look in and say, well, we're booked pretty good or not. You could get, Sabre sells products that actually do all that for you, but they have really big price tags. I do it in 4D for next to nothing. The synchronizing with our Microsoft GP database happens from this standalone machine running at night, doing these little jobs. Other jobs that would be really time consuming to run on the local user's workstation because of network latency. Instead, I'll save all the parameters of what the report is they want to run. This little machine will grab that out of the file when it sees it's there, run it, turn it into a text file, stick it in an email as an attachment, send it back to them. Runs faster because this machine's sitting right next to the server and not over a high latency network. We have a really large code database, okay? And having a small development team, which means me, because I'm the only 4D programmer, is a challenge. And so that was one of the reasons why when I was doing the web interface for out in the stations and a full 4D application in town, it was so confusing because I had to code one way here and one way there. As I moved to SQL Passthru, all my code became the same because it works the same whether I'm on a 4D client, 4D remote mode talking to the server, or if I'm on a standalone volume desktop engine, which is what I'm going to show you here, connecting to the server via SQL Passthru. Same code. The only difference is before I execute the actual SQL query, I say, talk to that data server, and then after you're done, go back to your local one. The local data file has very little data in it because I only really put in there some very, very static tables that don't hardly ever change. Just because then it's simpler to do sometimes some local regular query, 4D query type statements to look at local data and stuff like that rather than doing a long SQL string. Flexible is important. I'm sometimes my own worst enemy in that I'll tell my users, oh, would you like that? And they go, yeah. And so then I have to design it. And that's good because it keeps me busy and it means that they get whatever they need to make them productive. And that's a key thing. If the users aren't productive, then they're going to go look somewhere else for how to get what they want. And so people will come up and say, well, I've seen this new product that does this and this and this. And I go, I can do that in 4D. Oh, okay, great. So it's good to be flexible. Just caution that you're going to even be busier. But I like being busy, so that works out. When it comes to the web side of it, the only thing I can say is it's a moving target. What I'm going to show you in a minute with what we're currently using with Wakanda is using Wakanda version 1X. That's what's running on the servers. The framework within it is Angular 1, and it's talking to still a 4D server that is currently running 16R4. So it's very flexible. And that's kind of an overview on that. Wakanda and Angular, those are the two things I'm using right now. When you're dealing with any kind of JavaScript development, you got to have a good environment to develop your JavaScript. I use VS Code. I've used lots of different text editors. I've started with Sublime Text, and I've used Atom. I used WebStorm for a while, but then VS Code came out and is just as good as WebStorm, and it's free. So I've been starting to use that. With Wakanda 2, which is what's out now, it incorporates into it both Node and NPM. And that's one of the reasons why I'm moving to it, because the development cycle using Node and NPM in a live build situation is really nice on the JavaScript side, because the fact that as you change your JavaScript code, you're seeing it recompile the JavaScript and show you the changes on a web browser instantly. So it's a real good feedback for, try this in the JavaScript and it works or it breaks or it doesn't. The VS Code environment is really good at giving you both auto-completion and helping you show all your errors and stuff, so that quite often you don't have to really know everything there is about JavaScript as far as code completion. Just like in 4D, you can always type a command and goes, oh, here's all the parameters you need and stuff like that. Auto-completion in 4D is really good. VS Code is really good with JavaScript. And then TypeScript, which is a new superset of language for JavaScript that more and more people are using. If you do Angular 4 or 5, which it's up to now, you do it all in TypeScript, which is just, it's kind of commands that are going to probably come to JavaScript in the next year or two, but they're not there yet, so they're in TypeScript. And using NPM, when it builds, it basically recompiles the JavaScript down so it's just the current official JavaScript that actually goes out to the web browsers. So you don't even, you get advantages of TypeScript, and there are lots of them. Typing is a big thing, because in JavaScript there's no requirement to type your variables, and you can really shoot yourself on the foot later down the road when your web page crashes all the time because you use the same variable both as a string and a long-it somewhere, and it didn't like that. TypeScript helps you type stuff, so it's really good to go with. So that, I don't want to say thank you yet, but that's just, I want to go through the kind of the points, and then I want to actually show you the app, and then I'd like to spend more time with questions and answers if that's what you guys come up with. So what I'm going to do, hopefully here, is switch to a live copy. Let me get all these other windows closed. Okay, I'll hide others. Okay, so what I'm running right now, and I wasn't sure what screen resolution I was going to have here. Yeah, you wish that was Alaska. Yeah, nobody knows where that is, unless you've been to Malaysia, but anyway. So I'm already running a volume runtime. You can see the name of the actual application instead of 4D up there, because it's a built volume desktop application. And I've already got my VPN tunnel running, and I'm already actually logged into my server. I logged in while I was in the other session. But because this is a standalone machine, it doesn't have to have the server to stay running. Only when I ask for data is it going to say, can I talk to the server back in Fairbanks, which is what we're going to do right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a window that's, let's see, first let's just do, I think we got some planes that may have taken off this morning. So I'm going to open a window that shows all our current flights. And first I'll pull up the whole day schedule. So the data that comes up here, that's coming from my server in Fairbanks live. And so these are flights that are scheduled to go today right now. And the color coding means different things. Most of them doesn't mean much. The top two have actually already flown. The top flight was from Anchorage to Kenai, which is down on the Kenai Peninsula, big fishing area. And then the return flight was right after it. And they're actually showing gray, which means they've already completed. The ones in red and orange mean that they should have left, but they're delayed for some reason. And then the yellow flights are flights that haven't left today. And so those are that's a list box, okay? And when I clicked the button down there, I said, give me all the flights for today. I filled in the today's date automatically. I do have query editors where you can come up and make specific stuff, but most of my users like, predefined queries. So they want to say, just show me the flights that are in the air. And so I click that button, I search for the flights that are in the air. And again, the red means that right now the dispatchers haven't updated the current times of the aircraft, so they're more than 15 minutes old, so that's why you're seeing stuff like that. But if I double click on any of these, I actually go into the record and see more detail. So basically, I did a select into arrays of all the different flights, and now when I double clicked on it, I used a UUID as my primary key and said, give me all the fields for that one record. And this was one of the last parts of my original database that was done with modify selection that I've now moved to using a list box, and then these are all variables instead of fields, okay? And it was a really complex form, and it was, at first I was worried because you don't want to start a whole new form and have to create all these variables. And so one of the neat things I found out in 4D, if you have to do this where you're trying to convert a form that's got lots of fields on it to instead a form that's all variables, is fortunately in the design mode, you can select, easily right-click, say select of same type, and select all your fields. Then in the properties dialog, you can go up and change it to a variable. And what it'll do is it'll change all those fields to variables that have the table name and the field name as their variable name, which will work, although it's a little bit cumbersome with the brackets in there. What you can then do is use replacing content to search for all those variables you just created, change them into content to something that makes sense, like V or VA, a table name and underscore, and then the real field name, so that you have a variable that's going to be more usable to you down the road. So actually, it wasn't near as hard to actually change all the layouts so much, the actual forms. What was more involved was in all the methods and scripts and stuff that are behind all these buttons and stuff that were all doing queries and stuff like that, because instead, I had to rewrite them all to do SQL selects. So that's what took the longest. But I now have every part of the database that all my regular users use in a list box select type SQL interface, so that everybody in the whole company now is running the standalone app like this. And typically I only have one actual 4D client running, and that's the one that's doing all these little background jobs at night. And that's given me several advantages, one of which is I can restart the server now and most people won't even notice it, because unless they're in the midst of a query, they won't even get an error. Even if they get the error, the app's not going to crash. It's not like if you restart 4D server and you got clients, they're all going to get bumped off. Instead, you just tell them, usually I send them all an alert message, I'm going to restart the server, and so they just don't ask for anything. And so once the server's back up and they try the query again, it works because it's just doing an SQL connection. It doesn't have to maintain any connection to the server. The other advantage to having everybody on standalone now is that when I have some new code I want to try, I can pick one user and give the one user the new copy of the structure that's in a OEM Desktop and see if it works, instead of loading it on the server and then having 50 users suddenly complaining because I just broke something, okay? The downside to that is that once I do have the new versions, I have to update every one of those workstations by copying the structure onto each one of those. But there are ways to make that work pretty easy, and we've got some pretty good tools and pretty good scripting that are able to push out those changes to all of them. And I even have a scenario so that on all my workstations, so that I don't have to call the user up and say quit because I want to give you a new structure, I basically keep 2 copies of the actual OEM Desktop in 2 different folders on their Windows machine. And one of them is the one that they actually double click on and start each time. And when it starts up, one of the first things it does is it looks at the other copy into a specific file that tells you what version it is. And if the other version is newer, because I just uploaded it onto their machine in that folder, I have like an A folder and a B folder, then it launches that version from within 4D and quits itself. So they see 4D, or they see, it doesn't say 4D, it says Flightmaster V16. They see start, and they quit, and then launch again, and they're on the new version. And so when I do my updates, I just have to look and see which one are they currently running, and I have to update the other folder. And so I don't have to really have much user interaction at all when I want to update a new version to them. And at the very least, the program automatically quits at night. So if I do the updates late at night, then the next time they start the next day, it's always going to give them whichever the 2 versions they have that's newer. So it makes it really good for that standpoint. If I, to show you another part of what's going on here, that's just the regular flights. But if I go and the stuff that I was talking about with Sabre, all our reservations for flights are in Sabre. But we need to pull them into our database to be able to put them on a passenger manifest. And that's primarily because in the Sabre world, a passenger and all their baggage is average weight, okay? Every bag is 29 pounds, and every passenger is like 200 pounds. And when you go on a 737 or 747, they just count all the people up, and they have an average weight, and that's how they do their weight and balance. And we can do that on our largest airplanes, which are de Havilland Dash 8s, seat 37 people. But on all our other planes, we have to have actual weights. And so we have to somehow capture the weights. We found a place in Sabre to actually store the passenger weight and their actual baggage weight. But we still need to get it out of Sabre and into our database so that we can build a manifest that shows the people with their actual weights, as well as in Sabre, when they say you have a flight that goes from point A to point B, that means there's one plane going from point A to point B, and you've got X number of seats. Well, in some of our destinations, we have really small planes, only seat 9 people, but we'll take reservations for 20, 30 people for that destination, because we'll just put 3 airplanes on it, and we'll fly them right out either one after another or at the same time. So you have to be able to take what's one flight in Sabre and divide it up into 3 flights for our purposes. And so we needed a way to do that. So I just stuck in like a flight number for today, and it's already today's date up there. And when I hit enter, what I'm doing is I'm doing about 6 Sabre Web Services calls to Sabre to pull passengers for this flight today. This one's relatively simple because the flight just goes from in this case, goes from Anchorage to Fairbanks. But it's doing the Sabre Web Services calls in the background. Now it's doing it from this machine. It's not talking to my server and having the server do the web service call. This machine is talking direct to Sabre, because Sabre's API is such that any computer on the planet can access, if it has the right credentials, their database and pull in whatever information you need. In this case, because I'm an airline, I can pull my actual information, whereas if I was a travel agent, I could use the same web of services, but then I'm going to just get numbers saying there's like X number of seats available or whatever. But instead, I pulled in actual people that are scheduled for this flight today. They're all in green because they've actually all checked in for this flight already, except for the one person obviously didn't show up. And so that's how they pull it in. And then from here, these people have actually already been put on a manifest. In this column right here, it shows that they're actually already manifested on a specific flight, because that flight was scheduled to take off at 6 a.m. and in Fairbanks right now it's 7:42, so that flight is one that already went. Other flights, some of the smaller villages we go to, let me see if I can get a flight that works here. Have multiple destinations. I think that's a flight number. They keep changing the schedule on me, so I don't always get the flights. I'll find out in a minute if it tells me not invalid flight. Invalid flight number. Let's see. Let's try this. I've also got our full schedule in here, so if I forget what our flight numbers are, I can just say I want to get all the schedules these are all just 3-letter identifiers for the places we go, and we do service a lot of places. So let's go to Hooper Bay. And this also comes from Sabre, because that's a good place for our flight. So let's go flight 3130. So it automatically filled that in for me over there when I double-clicked on it. So then I go everything again. And now this time it's a multiple routing flight, because it goes to Bethel to 2 other places, including Hooper Bay. Oh, no reservations on that flight today. Only one person. But anyway, this one actually goes to all these places. It goes from Bethel to VAK, which is Chivac, to Hooper Bay, to Scammon Bay, and back to Bethel. And so I'm trying to find a flight that would have like a lot of people on it today. Let's try the later flight and see if that has any more people on it. But basically, when in Sabre, to pull these up, what I actually have to do is I have to say, okay, give me everybody that's on Bethel to Hooper. And then give me another command that says everybody's on Bethel to Chivac, and then Bethel to Scammon, and then there's no returns on here, but if they're return people, I have to ask for them. So each one of those would be a separate command in Sabre, and even in our GUI Sabre application that the agents use on the ticket counter, they can only look at one of those at a time. So I'm able to aggregate all of those into one. A lot of that goes back to Sabre being based on originally on a mainframe server and the little itty-bitty 40-inch screen, and they couldn't overload the user with more than about 20 lines at a time. And so they don't have the tools to really aggregate that. They have some newer products now that sort of do it to you, but not as quickly and easily as I'm able to do using 4D and web services. So same idea. I'm doing a whole bunch of calls really quickly via web services. So when I did this, I made like 6 or 7 calls to Sabre and pulled that data in, and then I made 1 call to our database to see if any of these people were manifested on an actual manifest yet. Where on that other flight, it showed they were manifested here, none were manifested. 2 people are checked in so far, but that's it. So that's using both Sabre Web Services and 4D, all via SQL Passthru when I talk to 4D. Another thing I do is, like I said, I mentioned weather. We've got a screen here, and we have all these pre-built requests for weather for a given location. I got a couple pilots note back here, but basically I'm asking National Weather Service for a bunch of aviation-type weather products from a given spot. So I just say, get weather, and it's going to give me weather for the Barrow area. And so it did a telnet connection directly from this computer to DUATS, got all the data, and then put it in a text field that I can then scroll down and I know it looks like gobbledygook, and for most people it is, but that's a lot. It's a lot of data, and they get it right here. They can go to a web page and get it too, but on the web page they'd have to ask for either do a flight plan. They say I'm going to go from here to here and let them figure out what weather I should get, or ask for weather for each place one at a time. Whereas we've pre-built, when I go back to this request, the thing that says just get this weather up here, it's actually this long string of commands here that we've already pre-built and can edit on the fly that says I want all these different reports for all these different locations, and I'm departing in X number of minutes. So it just does it all the time.
These are records?
No, that's just well, it's saved in the database as a record, just for references. But that's just it's just a command string. You can save it in a variable anywhere you want. I save it in a table just for permanence, but it doesn't change. But then when I actually call that command, and like I said, basically when I click one of these, I'm doing a telnet command that then connects to them, executes that long string in one telnet command, and it comes back as a whole bunch of text, which I just put in a text window. And then they can cut and paste this into other, the daily flights section I was in over here. When I go into one of these flights, there's a whole release section that they print out when they do the actual release for a given segment that has the weather already pulled in. There's a weather tab here where they pasted in the weather from that other window that they thought was appropriate to this pilot. And then they do risks for what, say, some check boxes checked for what kind of things are going today. There's some moderate icing today and moderate turbulence today, so that affects the overall risk of the flight. We risk all our flights to decide whether or not they should go or not. If the risk number gets too high, then they have to get the Director of Operations approval. A lot of that's done not just for safety, but it impresses our insurance companies. Then they go, oh, okay, you guys really look at what you're doing and think about it before you send a pilot out somewhere without thinking about it. So that's part of that. Another thing that I do, just another way to look at the same flight data, is I have a thing that uses a plugin called HMCal from Huback Media. So it's basically supposed to be a Gantt chart program. And what I do is I take all the flights for the day and their takeoff and landing times, and then plot them. So these are aircraft numbers. This is the time of the day. Red line is current time. And so that's where they're at and where they're scheduled during the day. That's all the flights for the day right there. But I can narrow it down and say, like, just show me the bigger planes so that we have something smaller to look at. And so that's just the Dash 8s that are flying today. And green means they're in the air, and so it shows you roughly where they're at. And then if I add another thing in here called tracking, remember I mentioned GPS tracking? Then what I get is these little dashes, and I actually have to do one more thing here because I forgot that I'm on daylight savings time now. Let me update this one more time. Because the GPS tracking data that I get from the aircraft is in UTC, so I have to always convert it to local time to get it to match. So these little hash marks that are underneath here, each one represents an individual network or GPS plot that I got back from the airplane at a given time. So it's saying at that time that airplane was at 16,000 feet, and that's the Latin long that they were at, which I can then plot on another map if I want to. Right now, because of the way I'm connected up right here, my internal map plotting software is not exposed to the outside, and so I can't get to it. But we have a website where if I clicked on this, it would bring up a open source map thing, not really kind of like Google Earth, but it's open source, and plot all those plots out so you can see where the aircraft is. I can show you that later in a different way, but if somebody actually wants to see what it looks like, but it's nothing magical. It's just using GPS coordinates and plotting your actual aircraft. But that's just another way of taking something that is available in 4D and giving it to the people in a graphical use. So some of the managers use this so they can see the whole day in a little bit better environment.
What is the area where you show this?
It's an HMCal plugin, which is HMCal is a plugin. And it's designed for flowcharts, or not flowcharts, Gantt charts. And I just use it in this way instead. And so, when you hover over it, it tells you what their time and takeoff and where they're going from Anchorage to DLG, Anchorage to Dillingham. So that's another Another little thing that we use from that. Where are we at on time? No, we're doing good. We also, like I said, we keep the HR stuff in here, so I'll pull up the our HR section, which I have to log into again because of security. If I did it right, I should get a window here in a second. Okay. And I can, real quickly, I can just say, show all the current employees that we have, and it should be a little over 1,000. Okay, 1,057. Okay, and then they're arranged alphabetically right now, but I can do, I've got built-in searches, I've got wildcard searches. If I type in a few letters or their name and hit enter, I get just everybody that has PED either in the first name or the last name. And so I'm up there somewhere. And so then if you double click on a record, it goes into more detail. And so just regular HR data about me. This is also where we print out our badges. We do badge printing out of this and everything. So we got a badge printer that's hooked it up to a particular workstation so they can, and I try to make it dynamic as far as font sizes and everything because they're invariably changing how big they want this or that or whatever. And so I finally just said, okay, everything's dynamic. You pick the font, you pick the size, you pick the bold, the color, or whatever. And when you like it the way, you can save the fonts down the bottom right and print the badge up. Well, that's a terrible picture of me. But anyway, that ties in to what I'm going to show you in Wakanda on the website because all of the same HR information is available on the web. So to jump over to that, and then I'd like to get to questions and answers because everybody's going to want to know how all this works underneath. So if I go switch over to web browser here, Chrome, and I'll click on a link to our website. This is a Wakanda-based Angular framework website that's talking to that same server in Fairbanks. The actual Wakanda server is running on a Debian instance, just because I don't like to use Microsoft if I don't have to. The 4D server is on Windows, 2016 server, but this is running on Debian. And I've actually got 2 copies of it run on 2 different servers, and I mirror them so that one goes down, the other one works. They have different URLs. This one's www, the other one's called read.ravenalaska, because mostly what we use is a read file system here. This is written using Bootstrap framework, and so it sort of scales down. I'll go ahead and log in. I think I tapped it twice. Okay, so when it first logs in, it brings up stuff specific to me or to the individual user. I have like all the permissions, and so because I have all the permissions, I have all these different sections I can get to, but these are all controlled within 4D. If you're not a certain level of privilege level, then all you get is like employee info and maybe my read files. But if you're a supervisor, you get the other ones that make more sense. The first page here is basically 4 tabs that are basically just listing files that we have uploaded to our web server that the users might need for common functions, like a guide to one of the phones that they have. Somebody says, how do I use this phone? Well, rather than making sure you have that phone available, we put all these different forms in a common place. And so all these different forms, there's manuals on the forms, and then there's station forms, which are a different group of forms. Now, all these actual files are saved on the Wakanda server, okay, and are served by the Wakanda server. But the data that you're seeing displayed, which is the file name, the actual description of the file, what kind of file it is, how big it is, who by username added by those employee numbers, who added it and when they added it, that's all saved in a table in 4D. And so I control it all that way. And what it helps me do is that when people upload new copies of the files, I don't have to worry about file name conflicts or anything like that, because they can name it anything they want and put any description they want. When they upload it, I actually save the file with a UUID in the file name that points back to the database that tells me what the real name of the file should be and the real description is, so that when someone downloads it, it's going to download it and name it what the person originally said it was. And there might be, because a lot of times they'll upload a file that, oh no, I need to upload a newer version of the file. Oh, the wrong one. And I didn't want to deal with them telling me to go in and delete the wrong one, or having to deal with deleting it through the web interface, the wrong one, or accidentally deleting it. So every time they upload a file, it just creates a whole new file on the server. Eventually, if I want to go in, I can clean it up, but it's not like they're taking up gigabytes of space or anything. And because I'm running 2 servers, I have Linux in the background using rsync to synchronize both servers. So they upload it on one server, in 10 seconds later, it's synced on the other server. So no matter which server you connect to, you see all the same files. So all these files, like I said, are downloadable. If the user needs to see it, they just click on it and then they say download file. and it should download it on my computer, and then I'll launch Acrobat and show the file, W4 form, which anybody could get, but sometimes nobody knows where to get it at. So we'll go that and go back. Each individual employee has a section that they can look at and find out information about other employees. But it's limited in here in what they can see. We don't show all kinds of personal information. Basically just who they are, what their position is, what their employee number is, because we actually have like 3 companies that are all under one umbrella, which company they work for, what their station is. And then if they click on them, and this is coming from the same data that you saw me in the 4D, it pulls their picture up. So they can say, oh, that's who that guy is, all right? And this is everybody right now, but they can also search for names. They can go in here, and, and if I type in something close to that and hit return, it should get me and a few other people. And so when I click on me, I should get that same ugly picture, yep. So, and I click on somebody else. And again, all the data is stored in 4D, but it's being passed through the 4D mobile connection to a Wakanda server that's sending it to the web page, okay? So that's how that works. And then this last section we added is kind of a company Dropbox thing. It's another thing of putting files up and taking files down, but it's more controllable because in here you have a field over there that says restrictions, and you see some of them say secured. And the secured ones mean only the person that uploaded it has control over who can download it. And one of the things up here at the top is it says create file download link. So what they can do is they can upload a file to here, then they highlight the file and they say create a download link, and it gives them a URL. And when they create that link, they can say how long is this URL good for? Is it good for 2 hours, 2 weeks, whatever? They email that link to anybody in the world that they want, and within that time frame, that person clicks on that link, they get logged into the same website, but all they see is that one file, and they can download it. As well as there's create upload link. They can say create an upload link. Doesn't create any files, but it creates a link that you can send to somebody. They can log into our website, upload a file that we can then get. So it's kind of like our own private company Dropbox scenario, except that we're not using Dropbox. It doesn't cost us anything, and it's all on our servers. So and again, it's all done with Wakanda and Angular and stuff like that. If I go to the next section here, my read files, one of the main reasons we originally created this thing is what we call a company read file. Most people call it company memo. The read file terminology comes from the pilot industry. There's a thing called read files, which is like mandatory things that the pilots have to read before they fly. And we needed a way to track that. And we just expanded it to the whole company. And so when they have a company memo, sometimes they're important, sometimes they're not. Happy Easter, the CEO sent out one just the other day telling everybody Happy Easter, and here's what's coming new at the company. But we wanted to be able to tell when the people got it. Used to, everybody did all their work in 4D, and their time clock was in 4D, everything was in 4D. So when they clocked in the morning, you'd get a list. Here's the read files you haven't read. So you'd have to read it before it let you clock in. It actually would clock you in, but it wouldn't officially clock you in until you read the read files. So it got everybody captive. We got the things read. Information got out to everybody, and it was working good. Once we got to the point where not everybody's in 4D. You got 1,000 employees, but maybe only 20% of them are actually touching the 4D application each day. We needed a better way to do it. And so since everybody has email, we thought the way to do it was we'll send them an email. And so when somebody creates read files, either in the website, which is what most people do, or you can actually do it in the 4D application too, but most everybody does on the website, they create a target list of employees. And so what I'll do is down here is where we actually create it. And what I'll do is, this one is not going to look good because this one went out to everybody. It went out to 919 people were targeted. But something that's smaller here, like these sales reports, which are focused on just a specific group of agents that work with that. On their target detail, they've got selectors up here based on where the person works, okay, or what department they work in, or there's some supervisory levels that they could use, or they could just pick specific employees. But they create this list of target people they wanted that are employees that they wanted to send to. Once they like the list the way they want, by either using this person, this person wanted to get everybody that works at HOM, which is Homer, which is down in the Kenai Peninsula. So their target was Homer, and that's just all the Homer employees. Once they get that, then she created her content on this page, which isn't very much, just telling everybody what you need to do with your sales reports, okay? And then she published it, okay? And this has already been published, so I can't do it again. But on the first page here, it already says published, but I could republish it. But she published it. Once she published it, that little 40 client machine I have that doesn't do anything except do odd jobs, it sees that, and it turns around and starts sending the emails out to each user. The email has a link that'll take them straight to that page, like, so that when they click on it, they're like on this page looking at, say, this read file, but they still have to log in. I throw a dialog up in the front that they have to still enter their password, so I can make sure they didn't give it to their brother and their brother went and did it. Somebody's got to know the password. Once they log in, then here they say, I acknowledge the read file, and it records it so that when that supervisor who created that read file, in this case, let me go back and show the Homer one, sales reports. She goes back to the history tab of hers, and it can tell her when everybody, this is when they viewed it, and this is Kendo grid. They viewed it, true, everybody's viewed it, and then this is the acknowledged field, and I think everybody in there is acknowledged, but it showed them the date that they read it, date they viewed it, and the date they acknowledged it, okay? And so she can see that, you know, and she can actually use these buttons up here too, and she can say, show everybody that's not viewed it, there's one person that hasn't viewed it, you know, she can say the people that haven't acknowledged it, and 2 people haven't acknowledged it. Viewed means they logged in enough to see it on the screen, but they never clicked the button saying, I acknowledge it. And so that one of those persons hasn't done either one, and the other person viewed it but forgot to hit the acknowledge button. So the supervisor can then go to their people, and the supervisor from here can even like, you know, send an email either to their supervisor or to the individual saying, you know, why haven't you read it or whatever. And she can republish it later, and the republishing just sends out emails to anybody that hasn't already acknowledged it. The supervisors also have access to a thing called HR updates, where they can create an update that says this person's phone number changed. And it just generates an email to the HR department and says whatever you told them to say. So it's just an easy way through the web interface for supervisors out in the villages and other communities to make feedback to HR without having to call HR and leave a voicemail message. They also get feedback as to when HR actually looked at it and acknowledged it, because when the HR can send feedback back, as well as a lot of these still say they haven't actually even viewed it yet. I got to get on. We have a new HR team and they haven't been keeping up on this, but or actually some of these are really old too. But anyway, I went into one. But anyway. I've also got a thing in here which nobody really uses too much. It just shows all our current flights in a list-only view, just so people can, again, see which flights are actually flying or not like that. And again, it's pulling it from the same data source. I don't have all the color coding and everything here, but it does show that there's 6 planes that are up flying right now. So that's pretty much it on the Wakanda side. I'll go back to employee info. And we've got 8 minutes maybe. Go to 12:15. So that's all I have right now that I can think of, but I'm sure there's lots of questions, and then I can go actually look at the code for these of you. I do have a demo database. It's the same demo database I used in 2016 to mainly show the SQL Passthru and the Wakanda side of this stuff that I haven't put up yet because I was trying to wait and see if anybody really wanted it, and I didn't have time to get it on the thumb drive, so it's not on the thumb drive, but we can upload to Summit website if somebody wants it. To see it. It's again based on Wakanda 1 and Angular 1 from that side, so the Angular part of it is probably worth uploading. But if you just want to see what my 4D mobile methods look like and how I do them, I can do that. So here's a question. I'm going to get some water now that Tim mentioned that.
The thing that really intimidates me is that you go through this list of products in order to go to the web, where you've got you got CSS and you got HTML and you have all these different libraries and on and on and on. Yeah. And maybe it's not as complex as all that, but you just look at the sheer number of products or pieces you have to put together. And maybe you can speak from experience about how stiff is the learning curve on that? Is it really such that it kind of blends naturally, and after a while you feel like you're working in one environment, or does it really feel as patchwork as it seems from the outside without any experience on that?
At first it was really patchwork, okay, and it was really, I took some JavaScript class just to get going on that, and then trying to learn Angular, and we took some training at 4D from Dave Robbins when he was still on staff there to learn Angular and using Wakanda for the back end. But then I kind of really got involved in the Angular community, especially once Angular 2, 4, and now 5 have come out, which have just dramatically improved the easiness of using Angular, not only because of using TypeScript on that side, but with the combination of using TypeScript, where Angular 4 and now 5 has gone as far as being modular, and using something like VS Code or WebStorm to actually do the work in, it is easy, I think, for me to do coding in JavaScript/TypeScript as it is in 4D, because the IDE, in this case really just a text editor, VS Code, but it's sort of, they don't like to call it an IDE, but it really is, makes it really easy because it constantly tells you what you don't have right in JavaScript. I mean, it's constantly, and it has little things that come up and say, well, just fix everything you can fix because you typed it wrong. And so it sticks in all the missing semicolons and spaces and indents and brackets and braces and stuff like that, as well as auto-completion, because if you go through their model, which on the Angular side, they have a templating model now, so people can build templates that you suck in. Wakanda does the same thing in the Wakanda environment because it's really the same thing, the templates in there. It's the same idea. Is you build this template that you then import, and all these different Angular files or JavaScript files or TypeScript files, get built automatically with a lot of code already in them, and then you just go into them and start, filling in what's going to be specific to you. So it's kind of like, almost like what you saw with Laurent showed earlier, as far as being able to export a full structure from 4D and then pulling it back, because the whole idea is, they want to be able to share it and have versioning and stuff. And so the more you can scaffold everything exactly the same, it's much easier for you to move from one person to another person working on it, or just taking a template and building on it yourself. So it's getting a lot easier. I'm going to NGConf, which is in a week after next. And that's, if you're going to get into Angular, I highly recommend you going to one of the Angular events. There's 2 or 3 that they put on, and lots of other smaller ones all over the country. And Pluralsight is a great resource for learning Angular. I've tried several different online things, and Pluralsight's definitely the best. Most of the key developers on the Angular world, from both Google and other companies, do really, really good classes on Pluralsight. And there's almost always complete code databases that go with it that you can follow along with and watch the video and then do what they recommend and stuff like that. It's really, really good. And they're really good at teaching you how to do it right the first time, not just how do you make it sort of work. And between Angular 1 and Angular 2 now, it's just night and day difference as far as how much more modular and well organized it is, as well as how much faster and more efficient it is when you actually use it as the end product, because it's almost like saying it's now compiled before it goes to the browser. What it's actually doing is it's taking TypeScript, re-rendering it into JavaScript, and doing what they call tree shaking, which means it goes through and all the stuff all the different libraries you may have loaded during your development environment you never actually touch, it takes them all out, so that the actual thing that goes to the web browser is really, really small. And that really helps in the mobile environment. So even if you don't do native apps, and there's even a thread in Angular where there's a native application process that they're working on in Angular, so that you can take Angular and render it into an app to run on a mobile device. So there's, just like, there is Ionic, and I'm experimenting with that right now through Wakanda, which basically takes JavaScript, compiles it into looks very similar to what she showed you with 4D for iOS, in that you build your project in Angular, and then you tell, or in Wakanda, because Wakanda is really tied closely into that, and you say build it, and it launches Xcode Studio and launches the simulator and takes all your JavaScript code and renders it into an actual application in the Ionic framework and pops it up in your iPhone simulator, or it'll do it for Android Studio and it pops it up on your Android device. So there's just, because so many people are doing it, there is just tons of improvements and tons of information available. So it's getting much, much easier. So especially if you stick with something like a large framework that's supported like Angular. React is another one, which is probably just as popular, but it's a little more simpler. It's not as data-centric as Angular is. That's what Facebook uses and Netflix uses, but it's more media-oriented than it is data-oriented. So Angular is much more enterprise level and top-to-bottom package instead of just the user interface. Any questions? So if you get any questions, feel free to contact me. Either one of those work, all 3 of those. I haven't published that much stuff on GitHub, but I put it up there anyway. But it's, I think the important thing to realize is that 4D is extremely flexible. You can make it do anything for anyone, and that's what I always encourage people is don't limit yourself by thinking all I can do is this. I can make it work for anything. I've constantly had other more expensive applications that they wanted to buy, and then they said, oh, and then they looked at what I could do, and they go, okay, never mind, we'll just let you do it. But I still need a replacement for me so I can retire. So anybody want to move to Alaska? Yeah, she wants to leave Austin already and move to Alaska. Okay. All right. Well, thanks. I appreciate it.